62 people. One long conference table. A projector casting cold light across pressed suits and careful postures, the kind of room where nobody laughed at the wrong moment, and nobody asked the wrong question, because Diana Calloway had spent 5 years making sure of it. The door opened. He was 7 minutes late. Faded flannel uncombed hair, and hanging from his left shoulder swinging once, as he eased the door shut behind him, a child's dinosaur backpack in worn green canvas. Diana's presentation died mid-sentence. Her eyes moved over him slowly, the way someone surveys damage before deciding it isn't worth salvaging. She didn't raise her voice. She never needed to. Collect your things and leave. Effective immediately. People like you have no place in a company that wants to be taken seriously. He didn't flinch. He set the little backpack down gently, deliberately, and reached for his phone. The number he dialed picked up on the first ring. Marcus. Ethan's voice was low, unhurried. Get up to the 9th floor conference room. Right now. He hung up before the other end could answer. Nodded once to the security guard waiting at the door, a young man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, and walked out into the hallway without looking back. The guard reached down, picked up the dinosaur backpack from the floor, and followed him out. Behind him, 62 people sat very still. Nobody on the 9th floor knew much about Ethan Cole, and that was mostly because nobody had ever needed to. He came in late. He left early. He sat at a desk near the middle of the open floor, not a corner, not a window, nothing that announced itself. And he did his work quietly, the way people do when they've stopped needing to prove something. A few of the longer-tenured employees had at various points attempted small talk. He was pleasant enough. He just never gave them much to hold on to. What he did have sitting in the corner of his desk beside his laptop was a small framed photograph. A woman mid-30s laughing at something just off camera, holding up a single sheet of paper with both hands like it was a trophy. Nobody on the floor had ever asked who she was. The frame was small, the image slightly faded, and there were enough unspoken rules on the 9th floor that personal curiosity had long since been trained out of most people. Her name was Sarah. The paper she was holding was the first signed client contract Cole and Partners had ever received, printed in a rented room with 2 desks, a second-hand office chair, and a printer that jammed every 3rd page. She and Ethan had built the company together from that room through 7 years of early mornings and late calls and the particular exhaustion that comes from building something real. By the time the company had a 9th floor to speak of, her name was already woven into the architecture of the place, even if it no longer appeared on any wall. She had been gone for 2 years. Ethan had stepped back after that. Not away, just back, choosing to manage his stake quietly, rather than occupy the chair at the head of the room. There was a 6-year-old who needed a parent present, not just employed. Lily had her mother's eyes and her father's stubbornness, and she had started 1st grade that September with a dinosaur backpack she'd selected herself from a rack at the back of a drugstore, insisting it was the best one, because she explained very seriously it was green. That morning she had tripped on the uneven pavement just outside the school gate. Nothing serious, a scraped palm, a tear that came and went in under a minute. But Ethan had crouched down on the sidewalk and cleaned the graze with the small first aid kit he kept in the car, and then he had driven to the office, and the dinosaur backpack was still on his shoulder when he pushed open the conference room door at 7 minutes past 9, because he had forgotten again to leave it in the car. Diana Calloway noticed the backpack first. She was 41 slides into a 60-slide presentation on regional performance metrics when the door opened, and she had the particular skill honed over 5 years of managing the 9th floor, of registering a disruption and categorizing it before most people had finished blinking. Her eyes moved over Ethan in under 3 seconds. The flannel, the hair, the green backpack swinging from his shoulder, the complete absence of any acknowledgement that he had just walked into a room full of his colleagues mid-presentation and was apparently unbothered by it. Diana had not built her reputation on patience. She had built it on consistency, on the understanding reinforced over years that the standards she set applied to everyone in the room equally, and that exceptions were the first sign of a system beginning to fail. The 9th floor ran on time, on appearance, on the shared agreement that professionalism was not a preference, but a baseline. People did not arrive late to all staff meetings. They did not carry their children's belongings into professional spaces. And they certainly did not stand at the back of the room in a faded flannel shirt, looking like they'd stopped by on their way somewhere more important. She let the slide behind her sit untouched. "Collect your things and leave." Her voice carried without effort the way it always did. Effective immediately. People like you have no place in a company that wants to be taken seriously. The room absorbed it the way rooms absorb something they weren't prepared for completely and without exhaling. Ethan didn't move right away. He stood at the back of the room for a moment that lasted longer than it should have, long enough for a few people near the end of the table to glance sideways at each other without actually turning their heads. Then he reached down, unhooked the backpack from his shoulder, and set it on the floor. Carefully, the way you set something down when you don't want it to get scuffed. He took out his phone, pressed a single contact, waited 2 seconds. "Marcus?" His voice was exactly the same as it had been in every early morning, every unremarkable Tuesday, every quiet afternoon on the 9th floor. "Get up to the conference room, right now." He ended the call, looked up at the security guard. Diana had already gestured toward the back of the room, a silent instruction clearly practiced, and gave him a small nod. Then he walked toward the door. Steady. No performance in it. A junior analyst named Rachel, sitting 3 seats from the end of the table, watched him go. She had been on the 9th floor for 14 months, long enough to understand what it looked like when someone was trying to hold themselves together on the way out of a room. The tight jaw, the 2 straight shoulders, the eyes that moved to the floor. Ethan's eyes didn't move to the floor. He pushed the door open and walked out, and the last thing Rachel saw before the door swung closed behind him was the angle of his expression. Not devastated, not furious, not even particularly surprised. He looked, she thought, like someone who had just made a phone call he'd been waiting a long time to make. Marcus Webb did not take the elevator. He took the stairs all 9 flights and arrived at the conference room door with the particular energy of a man who had been dreading a specific phone call for longer than he cared to admit. He was the company's CFO, which meant he understood numbers with the precision most people reserved for language, and the number he kept returning to climbing those stairs was 15. 15 minutes since Ethan had walked out. 15 minutes in which Diana Calloway had apparently convinced herself that the situation was still manageable. He pushed the door open without knocking. Diana was mid-sentence, addressing the 4 people still seated around the conference table. 2 members of her immediate team, 1 HR coordinator, who looked deeply uncomfortable, and a senior account manager who had the expression of someone watching a car slide slowly toward a guardrail. She turned when Marcus entered, and the sentence died. He crossed the room without greeting anyone, set a single sheet of paper on the table in front of her face, up flat the way you put down something you want someone to read without the option of looking away. It was the front page of the company's founding charter. At the top, underlined in the document's original formatting, and circled now in red ink, was a name. Ethan J. Cole, chairman of the board and founding shareholder. Diana looked at it. Then she looked up at Marcus. "That's not possible," she said. He works on this floor. He comes in late. He has a..." She stopped. Marcus picked the paper back up. "You just terminated the man who signs your contract." He said it the way someone reads a fact from a document, no heat in it, no satisfaction, just the particular weight of a thing that is accurate and unfortunate and cannot be revised. "I'd suggest you stop sending emails." He turned and walked back out. Diana stood at the head of the empty conference table for a moment, the projector still running behind her, the current slide still glowing against the screen. a bar chart showing the 9th floor's year-over-year performance, every metric trending upward, every number exactly where she needed it to be. She had checked those figures herself. She had built that presentation carefully the way she built everything, and it had all made perfect sense 40 minutes ago. She reached for her phone and began composing an internal message to her team. Today's personnel decision was made in full accordance with company policy and proper managerial authority. No further comment at this time. She sent it before she finished reading it back. The 9th floor had resumed its surface appearance of normality. Keyboards, clicking phones on low volume, the ambient sound of a workplace that had decided collectively to pretend the last half hour hadn't happened. But the quality of the quiet had changed. People were working with the focused stillness of those who are also listening, and when the elevator at the far end of the floor opened at 11 minutes past 10, nearly every head lifted before its owner thought to stop it. Ethan stepped out. The security guard who had escorted him out earlier had left the dinosaur backpack at the front desk downstairs, a quiet transaction that had taken 30 seconds and resolved itself without discussion. Ethan was carrying only his laptop now, and without the backpack, without the slightly disheveled ease that had defined every other time he'd walked onto this floor. There was something different in the way he moved. Not harder exactly, just more deliberate, like a version of the same man who had quietly decided to take up the space he'd been standing in all along. The security guard at the floor entrance looked up, then glanced at his phone. A message from Marcus had arrived 4 minutes earlier and stepped aside without a word. Ethan walked to the conference room, connected his laptop to the presentation system with the unhurried efficiency of someone who had used that port before the admin credentials that controlled the room's display had never been revoked, because no one with the authority to revoke them had thought to do so, and pulled up a folder he had been maintaining quietly for the past 18 months. The screen filled with spreadsheets. People drifted to the doorway in ones and twos, the way people do when something is happening that feels too significant to watch from a distance, but too uncertain to walk directly toward. By the time Ethan had pulled up the third document, there were 11 people in or around the conference room doorway, and the number was growing. What they were looking at was not dramatic in its appearance. It was rows of data performance reviews, attrition records, internal evaluation scores, the ordinary-looking machinery of a managed workforce. But Ethan walked them through it with the patience of someone who had spent considerable time understanding exactly what he was looking at, and what emerged from the data piece by piece was a system that had been tuned not to measure performance, but to control it. Turnover rates that the official metrics had compressed into near invisibility. 4 employees whose exit documentation cited performance. Failures, documentation that when placed beside their actual project, records didn't hold. An internal scoring rubric that weighted something labeled team alignment at 30% of the total evaluation, a category with no objective criteria and no external review, assessed entirely by direct management. Assessed for the past 5 years entirely by Diana. Nobody in the doorway said anything for a long time. Diana arrived at the conference room entrance 4 minutes into the presentation. She took in the screen the people Ethan at the front of the room, and something behind her eyes shifted the way the ground shifts before it decides what to do next. He planned this. Her voice landed in the room before she did, directed at no one specifically and everyone simultaneously. This whole thing, the lateness, the visibility walking in like that, he wanted exactly this reaction. He manufactured a reason to come back in here and do this. She moved into the room, not to the front, but to the center, positioning herself between the screen and the people watching it. I have managed this floor for 5 years. Whatever that document says, I know what I built here, and I know what it takes to. I saved everything. The voice came from the left side of the room, not loud. Jordan Pierce was a junior data analyst who had been on the 9th floor for just under 2 years. Long enough to understand the unspoken mathematics of the place, which was that certain questions once asked didn't get forgiven. 3 months earlier, he had asked one of those questions in a meeting about a discrepancy between two sets of quarterly figures. Diana had pulled him aside afterward and explained with great precision and no warmth what happened to people on this floor who confused their role with their authority. Jordan had not asked another question in that meeting room. He had, however, kept every email. He set a USB drive on the table and slid it toward the center. Every message, time-stamped, including the one from October, where I was told my continued employment depended on not raising concerns about data I was actively responsible for verifying. The room was quiet in a different way now than it had been before. Then from the back, a woman named Claire, who had been on the floor for 3.5 years and had the careful posture of someone who had taught herself to take up very little space, set her phone face up on the nearest desk. I have the conversation where she told me my maternity flexibility review would be reconsidered if I missed one more Friday briefing. Another voice, then another. Not a flood, the people speaking were measured deliberate, each one placing something specific on the table rather than adding volume to the room. They were not performing outrage. They were doing something quieter and more durable than that. They were simply finally saying the thing they had, each individually decided was too costly to say, and discovering that the cost had changed. Diana's gaze moved across the room. She was looking for the faces that had always been reliable, the ones that reflexively aligned, that understood the structure and their place in it. She found some of them, but what she found more of in the majority of the faces turned toward her was something that wasn't quite hostility and wasn't quite pity. It was the particular expression of people who had been waiting to find out which way a room would fall and had just found out. Marcus returned to the 9th floor at 11:30 with 2 members of the board who had been reachable on short notice. They used the conference room Diana had been occupying 20 minutes earlier, and the meeting ran for 11 minutes. Diana was in the hallway when it ended, leaning against the wall beside the water cooler with her phone in her hand and a message half-drafted on the screen. She looked up when the conference room door opened. Marcus came out first. He said 2 sentences. Then he went back inside. She walked back to her desk, sat down, opened her laptop. The screen asked for her credentials. She typed them. The system considered them for 3 seconds, then returned a message she had written herself into the IT security protocol 2 years earlier during a compliance update at her own request. This account has been suspended. Please contact your system administrator. She read it twice, set the laptop on the desk, looked at the window. Outside 9 floors below the street was doing what streets do at mid-morning taxis, pedestrians, a delivery truck with its hazards, on the ordinary motion of a city that had no idea what floor she was on or what she had lost access to in the last 40 minutes. The view was the same view it had always been from this spot. She had looked at it every workday for 5 years and found it reassuring evidence of scale of the distance between herself and the noise below. It didn't reassure her now. She turned from the window and looked at the rest of the floor. The organized shelves of her workstation, the surface of her desk clear except for the locked laptop and a ceramic mug with the company logo on it, a gift from her team 2 Christmases ago presented with a card that everyone had signed. She had kept it because it was useful. She thought about the name on the founding charter. She thought about the phone call Ethan had made without looking at her, with the backpack still on the floor beside his feet. She thought about the 11 minutes in the conference room and what it meant that the board had needed only 11 minutes. For the first time since 9 o'clock that morning, Diana Calloway understood that she had walked into something she had not seen, not because it had been hidden from her, but because she had never considered that it could exist. A man who came in late, who carried his daughter's backpack, who sat at an ordinary desk and did his work without announcing himself. She had looked at all of that every day, and she had seen exactly what she expected to see. It had not occurred to her, not once, to look again. She found him at his desk, not a private office, not a room with a door, the same open floor desk he had always occupied near the middle of the 9th floor, with the small framed photograph of Sarah in the corner beside his laptop. He was standing when Diana arrived, looking at something on his screen, and he turned when he heard her steps, the way someone turns when they've already decided how the conversation is going to go. Diana had rehearsed something on the walk over, several things, actually a sequence of arguments she had arranged in order of strength, the way she always prepared for difficult meetings. She had been good at difficult meetings for a long time. She had walked into rooms with more at stake than this, and walked out with what she came for. She led with the one she believed in most. "You let this happen on purpose." Her voice was steady. She had made sure of that in the 2 minutes it took to walk the length of the floor. "You've been on this floor at that desk for however long, and you never said anything, never identified yourself. You wanted someone to do exactly what I did, so you'd have grounds to do exactly what you're doing now. That's not accountability. That's a setup." Ethan looked at her for a moment. Not unkindly, which was somehow worse than if he had. "I came to work," he said. "Every day. I dropped my daughter at school. I came to this building, I sat at that desk, and I did my work. I forgot a backpack in the car more times than I can count. I was late on the mornings when things happened that made me late." He wasn't raising his voice. He spoke the way someone speaks when they are saying something they have thought about carefully enough that they no longer need emphasis to carry it. "You saw all of that. Every day. And you decided based on all of that I wasn't worth a second look. That's not something I arranged, Diana. That's something you did. You had an obligation to what?" The question wasn't sharp. It was genuinely curious in a way that made it harder to answer than a sharp question would have been. "To tell you who I was, so you'd treat me differently, so you'd decide I'd earned the right to come in 7 minutes late." He shook his head just slightly. "That's exactly the problem. Not with me. With the system you built up here, where the way someone looks on a Tuesday morning determines whether they're worth basic professional respect." Diana had an answer prepared for that too. She didn't use it. There was something in the space between them that had shifted in the few seconds since he'd started speaking, a quality in the air that she recognized distantly as the feeling of prepared arguments becoming beside the point. She had experienced it before in meetings, and she had always found a way to redirect it. She looked for the redirect now, and found the open floor, instead the fluorescent light overhead, the desks on either side, the building she had navigated with total confidence for 5 years, feeling for the first time like a place she didn't entirely know the layout of. "The person who built this company with me," Ethan said, and something in his voice changed. Not breaking, just becoming more careful in the way that voices become careful around things that matter. Believed that a good workplace starts with actually seeing the people in it, not their titles, not whether their shirt is pressed on a Monday. The people. He glanced briefly toward the photograph on the corner of his desk, Sarah laughing, both hands holding up a single sheet of paper. "I stepped back from running this place because I had to. Because there was a 6-year-old who needed more of me than I was giving her, and that was the right call, and I'd make it again. But I stepped back too far. I let this floor run without checking whether what was being built here still matched what we started with." He looked back at Diana. "That's on me. The fact that it went on this long is on me. But what happened in that conference room this morning, and every meeting where someone got shut down for asking a legitimate question, and every review that moved someone out for not falling in line, that's not on me." Diana said nothing. She had come to this conversation with the intention of leaving it with something, an acknowledgement that the situation was more complicated than it appeared, a concession that her record deserved to be weighed against a single morning, some version of a door left open. She was good at leaving doors open. It was one of the things she was best at. There was no door here. She could see that now, standing in the actual open floor under the actual light. There was only the conversation that had already happened around her, and the 11 minutes in the conference room, and a man who had just told her, without cruelty and without pleasure, the precise shape of what she had done. She left without saying anything else. There was nothing left in the sequence that would have changed what was already true. Marcus handled the paperwork with the same economy he brought to everything. The termination agreement was standard processed through HR without ceremony, signed and filed before 2 o'clock. Diana cleared her workstation in under an hour. She had always kept it organized, which made leaving faster than it might have been. The ceramic mug with the company logo she left on the desk. She picked it up once, considered it, and set it back down. The elevator doors closed behind her at 13 minutes past 2. Ethan gathered the 9th floor at 3 o'clock. He didn't use the conference room. He stood in the open area at the center of the floor, the same space where people passed each other every day, on the way to the printer, to the kitchen, to the window, and he waited while people came out of offices and away from desks and found places to stand. He didn't call for quiet. The room settled on its own. He was wearing the same flannel shirt he'd worn that morning. "I know a lot of you stayed because you didn't have another option," he said, not loudly. There was no need for loudness in a room that had gone this still. Or you thought you didn't. Or you'd been here long enough that leaving felt like losing something you'd put too much into. He looked around the room, not performing the look, just actually looking the way someone does when they mean to take something in. "That changes today. I want you to know that." He told them about the review, not in the language of corporate restructuring. No frameworks, no phased rollouts, no language designed to make a significant thing sound like a manageable one. He said it plainly: the system that had been used to evaluate people on this floor was being suspended, and a new one was going to be built, and the people who built it were going to be the people in this room, not the people above it. Jordan Pierce, standing near the back beside Claire, looked at the floor when his name was mentioned. Ethan said he was being asked to lead the working group, not because of what he'd done that morning, though that mattered, but because of what he'd done over the previous 3 months, alone, without anyone asking him to. He had kept records when keeping records was a risk. That was the thing the group needed at its center. Jordan didn't say anything. He nodded once, still looking at the floor, in the manner of someone accepting something they hadn't expected to be offered. The 4 employees who had been pushed out received calls that afternoon. Ethan made them himself from his desk in the open floor. The conversations were short. He told each of them what he knew about what had happened to them, and he told them the door was open if they wanted to come back, and he told them to take whatever time they needed to think about it. None of them said yes on the call. He hadn't expected them to. The school gate was steel and painted green, and it was exactly the same gate it had been that morning when Lily had caught her palm on the pavement outside it. Ethan arrived at 3:30 and stood where the parents stood on the low curb facing the entrance, doing the particular waiting that parents do, which has no real texture to it, because it exists entirely in the space before the thing you're waiting for appears. Lily came through the gate, and a cluster of other first graders spotted him before he spotted her, and covered the distance between them at a speed that suggested the scraped palm from that morning had not significantly affected her general outlook. The dinosaur backpack retrieved from the front desk downstairs before he left the building was on her back, now where it belonged. She grabbed his hand and pulled him toward the sidewalk with the purposeful energy of someone who had things to report. "Did anything happen today?" she asked. It was her standard question, delivered with the tone of someone who considers the answer a reasonable expectation. Ethan looked down at her, at the face that had Sarah's eyes and his stubbornness, and its own entirely distinct expression, which was the expression of a person who had been alive for 6 years and found most of it pretty interesting so far. "I remembered something," he said. Lily considered this. "What did you remember?" He thought about the conference room that morning, the bar chart on the screen, every metric trending upward, the photograph on his desk. Sarah laughing, holding up a sheet of paper with both hands. The rented room. 2 desks. A printer that jammed every 3rd page. Everything that had come after, and everything that had been slowly unmade inside it without his seeing, and the particular feeling of a morning that had forced him to look directly at a thing he had been circling for a long time. "Why I built it," he said. Lily seemed to find this acceptable. She shifted the straps of the dinosaur backpack higher on her shoulders and kept walking, and Ethan walked beside her, and the afternoon light came down at the low angle it reaches in October, long and specific, the kind that makes ordinary sidewalks look briefly like somewhere worth paying attention to. The first internal email of the following morning was sent at 8:47, before most of the floor had finished their coffee. It was from Jordan Pierce. It was addressed to the full 9th floor distribution list, copied to Marcus Webb, and it contained a single question, a clear, specific, plainly worded inquiry about a discrepancy in the previous quarter's reported figures, with the relevant line items attached. No one asked him to take it back. No one suggested he reconsider the tone. No one pulled him aside afterward to explain the difference between his role and his authority. The question sat in the inbox of everyone on the 9th floor, and it waited for an answer, and the waiting felt to the people who had been on that floor long enough to understand what it meant, like the first morning of something that had not existed there before. Not loudly, not with any announcement. Just a question asked by someone who had finally been given the room to ask it. Ethan Cole had been in that building for 5 years. He had come in late and left early, and worn the same faded flannel on more Mondays than anyone had counted. He had sat at an ordinary desk and kept a small photograph beside his laptop and said good morning to people in the hallway, and forgotten with some regularity to leave a green dinosaur backpack in the car. He had been invisible the way people become invisible when no one decides they're worth looking at twice. It had taken one person making that decision out loud in a room full of witnesses to change everything that came after. And that, in the end, was the only mistake Diana Calloway ever made, that she could not recover from not the firing itself, not the words she'd chosen, not the audience she'd chosen to say them in front of. The mistake was simpler than any of that. She had looked at him and seen exactly what she expected to see, and she had never once looked again.